Mistress made the millionaire. Kick out his pregnant wife. She took revenge in court. In a quiet corner of Aspen's elite society, whispers grew into rumors of a scandal unlike any other. James Harrington, a self-made millionaire known for his sharp instincts and dazzling charm, seemed to have it all: the luxurious mansion, the booming business empire, and a graceful wife named Elizabeth who was carrying his heir. But when a mysterious woman named Veronica entered James's life, she set in motion a web of seduction and deceit that would shatter an innocent family. This is the gripping tale of a wife betrayed a mistress, brazen enough to demand her eviction, and a courtroom showdown that would change everything. James Harrington's story began with a tiny glimmer of hope. Born to a middle-class family in the suburbs of Denver, he watched his parents struggle to build something from nothing. His father, Robert Harrington, spent years as a real estate broker, often coming home with dusty shoes and lines of worry etched on his forehead. His mother, Carolyn, worked part-time at a local daycare, then returned each evening to cook dinner and help with James's homework. Money was never abundant, but their home was filled with warmth and love qualities that shaped James's ambitions and moral compass. From a young age, James strove to prove he was destined for greatness. While his classmates partied, James pored over business magazines. He devoured success stories and biographies of tycoons, determined that one day he too would build an empire. He even kept a journal where he noted daily goals. He refused to let the limitations of his upbringing define his future. After high school, James took a leap and enrolled at Harvard Business School scholarships, and part-time jobs got him through those rigorous years. By the time he graduated, he had connections in Manhattan's upper circles, along with a tireless work ethic. Moving to New York City seemed like a natural step. He was in the epicenter of commerce, surrounded by the skyscrapers he'd always dreamed about. He worked in private equity for a few years, then leveraged his network to start his own venture capital fund. Over time, savvy investments in technology and real estate turned his modest inheritance into a multi-million-dollar fortune. It was during a charity gala in Manhattan that James met Elizabeth Spencer, a striking brunette from a well-respected Boston family. She had graduated from Princeton in art history and worked as a curator at a small but prestigious gallery. They were introduced by a mutual acquaintance, Philip Baker, an investor from Redwood City, California, who had been a college friend of James's. According to Philip, Elizabeth was too sophisticated for a typical businessman, but it only took one conversation for James to be captivated by her intellect, grace and soft-spoken wit. Elizabeth, for her part, found James's confidence and determination refreshing. He was a whirlwind of energy, yet with an underlying kindness that reminded her of how her own father used to protect and guide her. Within 6 months, James proposed a year later in a ceremony at a sprawling Vermont estate. They exchanged vows under a canopy of fragrant pine trees. It was a fairy tale wedding. The couple enjoyed the early years of their marriage, traveling often. Monaco, Santorini, and the Maldives were just a few of their getaways. Yet they both knew that settling down and building a family was on the horizon. James's business soared, and Elizabeth transitioned from working full-time at the gallery to focusing on philanthropic endeavors. She became a key figure in Aspen's charity circuit after they decided to build a second home there. James found the mountain air rejuvenating. Elizabeth loved the community feeling. Their Aspen house, perched with a view of snow-capped peaks, became a retreat for long weekends and special gatherings with friends. Life was, by all outward appearances, perfect. They had money, prestige, a wide network of influential friends, and most importantly, a deep emotional connection that no rumor or rivalry had ever shaken. That sense of invincibility set the stage for everything that went wrong. James Harrington's fortunes often attracted opportunists, but few had the audacity of Veronica St. James. She was first introduced to James at a tech conference in San Francisco, where she presented herself as an up-and-coming consultant specializing in image branding. Veronica claimed she had helped numerous startups transform into global powerhouses by refining their public perception. She was a stunning woman, tall with fiery red hair cascading over her shoulders, and a self-assured presence that turned heads in any room she entered. Initially, James regarded her as just another ambitious professional. He listened politely to her pitch about improving his brand's outreach. She insisted that Harrington Capital James's venture fund needed a feminine perspective to truly capture new consumer markets. She spoke with the conviction of someone who had done her research. There was something about her that intrigued James, perhaps a mix of arrogance and genuine talent. She hinted at high-profile clients she had worked with, though she never provided names. A call to an acquaintance in Silicon Valley confirmed that Veronica was indeed a rising star, albeit with a reputation for blending personal relationships and professional ones. At the time, Elizabeth was in Aspen, hosting a charity event aimed at raising funds for art programs in public schools. James, left to navigate the conference alone, was flattered by Veronica's attention. She insisted they meet again later that week to discuss a potential partnership. James was unsure. After all, Harrington Capital's brand was strong. Still, curiosity got the better of him. She seemed convinced that her strategies would take his business to the next level. Their second meeting took place at a chic rooftop lounge offering panoramic views of the San Francisco skyline. Veronica arrived wearing an emerald dress that matched her eyes, making James do a double-take. Over cocktails she poured on the charm, peppering him with questions about his personal life, his passions, even his past, romantic history, all under the guise of understanding the man behind the brand. James, usually cautious, was disarmed by her intense attention. It felt good to be admired and taken so seriously by someone who exuded confidence and allure. He told himself it was all professional. She was just an eccentric consultant, and they were exploring the possibility of collaboration, but a small voice in his head warned him he might be treading dangerous ground. He thought about Elizabeth, about their upcoming plans to start trying for a child. Still, the excitement of forging new business paths overshadowed his caution. That evening ended with a handshake and a promise to continue talks. Veronica's lips curved into a coy smile as she walked away, leaving behind a faint hint of expensive perfume that lingered in the air long after she was gone. By the time James returned to Aspen and reunited with Elizabeth, he had all but forgotten about the impression Veronica had made on him. He was happy to be home with his wife. They spent a weekend skiing, laughing and planning for the future. Elizabeth had a glow about her. She was hopeful that this would be the month they'd conceive. Their conversations held a new sweetness, filled with references to possible baby names, and which guest bedroom would turn into a nursery. A few days later, while James was finalizing a deal, his phone lit up with a message. "Thinking about you. Let's schedule a call." It was from Veronica. He felt a slight pang of guilt, but he reminded himself he was free to do business with anyone he chose. Yet the tone of her message felt personal, not purely professional. He replied with a short formal email, suggesting a call the following week. Her response was almost immediate. "I'm available any time for you." Curiosity pulled James in. He rationalized that she was eager to land him as a client, nothing more. But their scheduled 20-minute call stretched into an hour. She made him laugh with witty stories about her other clients, though she never named them. She asked about his upcoming projects and made him elaborate on what kept him up at night in business. She concluded with a playful line, "If your wife ever needs tips for brand building too, I'm here," ending with a throaty laugh. After the call, James sat quietly gazing at his phone. Something about Veronica was magnetic that evening. Elizabeth picked up on his distracted mood. She asked him if everything was all right at work. James waved it off, attributing it to the stress of a big upcoming meeting. Elizabeth believed him. He had never given her reason to doubt him. Over the next few weeks, Veronica continued to text James. Their messages gradually became less about marketing campaigns and more about personal details. "How was your dinner with the investors tonight? You must be exhausted. Let me know if you need anything." The subtlety of her approach was key. Her words were always ambiguous enough to pass as caring for a client, but laced with an undertone that hinted at something deeper. Meanwhile, Elizabeth found out she was pregnant. The news transformed the house into a haven of joy. She surprised James with the positive pregnancy test hidden inside a little gift box. He was over the moon, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. Elizabeth teased him that he'd better build a bigger closet for all the baby's things. He insisted he'd start on the nursery that very week. For a brief period, it seemed the pregnancy overshadowed any budding flirtation with Veronica. James minimized his calls and messages to her life, refocused on Elizabeth's checkups, planning for a future with a child, and expanding his business to secure a legacy. However, Veronica was persistent. During a trip to Los Angeles for a meeting, James found himself alone in a hotel bar, bored and slightly stressed. A single text to Veronica. In LA for a few days, opened a door he should have kept locked. It started with a casual dinner. Veronica claimed she was already in Los Angeles on business. She suggested they meet at a high-end Japanese restaurant, known for its exclusive clientele. James, who prided himself on maintaining a professional boundary, told himself it was just a meal between colleagues. But the subtle flirting escalated. Veronica dressed in a sleek black dress. Her hair glossy under the restaurant's dim lights, kept leaning closer. Laughing at his jokes and brushing her hand against his, James felt a swirl of guilt and excitement. He tried to keep the conversation about business, but Veronica had a talent for pivoting to personal topics. She asked about his hopes for fatherhood, making comments like, "I'm sure you'll be an amazing dad," followed by a lingering gaze that seemed to challenge him to cross an invisible line. By dessert, his phone pinged with a text from Elizabeth asking how his meeting went. He felt a wave of shame and ended the evening swiftly. Veronica, however, was prepared. She offered him a ride back to his hotel in her rented luxury car. The moment James shut the passenger door, she leaned over and kissed him. It was brief but electric. He froze, pulled away and mumbled a weak protest. She apologized demurely, but her eyes flashed with triumph. Even in his confused state, James recognized a pivotal moment. He could walk away, or he could indulge the temptation. He rationalized, "It's just one kiss." In the weeks that followed, that single moment of weakness spiraled into a full-blown affair. They met in secret every time James traveled to San Francisco or Los Angeles. Veronica was always waiting, always dressed to kill. She showered James with compliments and made him feel like the most powerful man in the world. He still loved Elizabeth, but something about Veronica's brazen desire thrilled him. He told himself it was just physical, a wild detour before returning to the comfortable life he knew. Elizabeth's pregnancy was progressing smoothly, and when he was home in Aspen or New York, James devoted himself to her, but the guilt grew like a venomous weed in his chest. Veronica had no interest in playing second fiddle indefinitely. She was cunning and manipulative, skilled at reading James's vulnerabilities. As he grew more distant, she grew more demanding. She told him she wanted to be more than a secret. She hinted that Elizabeth might not be the only one who could give him a child. She teased him about how they'd be a power couple if they were together publicly. Slowly, she planted the seeds of an idea that Elizabeth was holding him back from his greatest potential. James tried to fight these suggestions, but he was in over his head. The more he tried to distance himself, the more Veronica found ways to pull him back in. She threatened to appear at his public events, or worse, call Elizabeth. Feeling trapped, James tried to placate her by promising more time and attention. Meanwhile, Elizabeth, now in her second trimester, noticed he was more anxious than ever, but couldn't pinpoint why. When Elizabeth was 5 months pregnant, she planned a lavish baby shower in Aspen, inviting close friends and family. The house was filled with pastel decorations, gourmet food, and excited chatter about the baby's imminent arrival. James's mother, Caroline, flew in from Denver, thrilled about becoming a grandmother. Elizabeth's sister, Sarah Spencer, came from Boston. The mood was joyous, but James kept checking his phone. He couldn't relax, fearing Veronica might do something rash. As Elizabeth and her guests played baby-related games, James excused himself to take a call. Sure enough, it was Veronica. She was furious that he was playing the role of devoted husband and expectant father in front of society while leaving her in the shadows. She threatened to crash the event. James begged her to stay away, promising to see her soon. Her response was a hiss of anger. "Either you tell Elizabeth about us, or I will." James ended the call feeling cornered. That evening, after the guests left, he stood by the nursery window, watching Elizabeth carefully stack the gifts. She was radiant, sporting a maternity dress that showed off her growing belly. A surge of guilt overtook him. He felt like the worst husband in the world. He tried to imagine a clean break from Veronica, but she had grown too vindictive. He could already see the tabloids and social media storms that would erupt if she exposed the affair. Veronica wasn't bluffing. The next morning, while Elizabeth was at a prenatal appointment, James received an envelope delivered by a private courier to their Aspen home. Inside were photos of him and Veronica, in intimate moments, leaving a hotel, kissing in a secluded corner, even one from a penthouse suite where they had shared a secret weekend. Attached was a typed note. "Decide where your loyalty lies. I won't be a side piece any longer." James called Veronica. Immediately, voice quaking with rage and terror. She answered calmly, as if she were expecting his call. "James," she said smoothly, "I want you to kick Elizabeth out. Divorce her. Don't worry about the baby. We can have our own. I'm not going to be quiet anymore." He sputtered objections, reminding her Elizabeth was pregnant, and that he did love his wife. Veronica was unmoved. "Do as I say, or I'll show these photos to every newspaper and business outlet in the country. Let's see how your precious public image holds up then. And let's not forget, if Elizabeth sees them first, she'll clean you out in court." As Veronica's words sank in, James knew he was headed for the darkest chapter of his life. The snowfall outside their Aspen mansion was gentle that evening, blanketing the pine trees and rooftops in pristine white. Inside, Elizabeth Harrington, curled up on the living room couch, a pregnancy book open in her lap, her hands resting protectively on her growing belly. The baby had just kicked, and she smiled to herself. These were the moments she cherished, the quiet anticipation of motherhood, the warmth of her home, the belief that everything was as it should be. But something was wrong. Over the past week, James had become distant. He no longer kissed her forehead each morning. He barely touched his dinner. When she asked how his meetings went, he answered with clipped words, avoiding eye contact. Elizabeth tried to brush it off as work stress. After all, he had massive investments in motion, and the stock market had dipped unexpectedly. But in her heart, she knew this was more than business pressure. James, she had asked 2 nights ago, "Is everything okay between us?" He'd simply nodded, distracted by his phone. "Just tired, don't worry." But she did worry. That evening, Elizabeth had prepared a simple dinner, grilled salmon and wild rice, one of James's favourites. She lit candles, hoping to coax back some of their old connection. Yet he barely touched the food. He paced the floor like a man trapped in a cage, running a hand through his hair, mumbling inaudibly, "James," she said, gently rising from her chair. "Please talk to me." He stopped mid-step, turned to her, and for the first time she saw it, the storm in his eyes. Not just frustration or worry. Something colder. Something final. "We need to talk," he said stiffly. Elizabeth's heart skipped. She eased herself down onto the couch, one hand instinctively wrapping around her belly. "All right, I'm listening." James remained standing. I think we rushed into having this baby. I'm not sure this marriage is working." His words hit her like a slap. At first she couldn't speak. Her throat went dry. "What are you talking about?" she finally whispered. "We've been happy. You were thrilled when we found out I don't know if I want a baby anymore," he said. And even he flinched at the lie as it escaped his lips. Elizabeth gasped, "James, please don't say that. We've talked about starting a family for years. You were the one who painted the nursery. You picked the crib." James couldn't look at her. Every word she said was a dagger of guilt. He had played house with her, while sneaking around behind her back. And now, under the crushing weight of Veronica's threats, he had convinced himself that pushing Elizabeth away might somehow prevent a larger collapse. "I need space," he said, voice colder now. "This marriage, it's suffocating me." Elizabeth stood trembling. "Is this about someone else?" she asked quietly. "Are you seeing someone?" James's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Tears welled in Elizabeth's eyes. "Oh my God, you are... I didn't mean for it to happen," he said hoarsely. "It's complicated. I can't do this right now." She stared at him, stunned. "I'm carrying your child, James. Our child. How can you just walk away from that?" "I'm not walking away." He insisted, though. The words sounded hollow, even to him. "I just need time. I need you to leave for now. Stay somewhere else." Elizabeth's face drained of color. "You're kicking me out. Out of our home, while I'm 5 months pregnant?" "I'll make sure you're taken care of," he said, avoiding her eyes. "I'll pay for anything you need. Just not here." Elizabeth's voice broke. "You coward, you can't even admit what this really is. You're not asking for space. You're choosing someone else over your family." James winced. "Please don't make this harder than it already is." "I didn't make this hard, James." She snapped through tears. "You did." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Elizabeth's breaths came in sharp, shallow bursts as she tried to hold herself together. Her hands trembled. The room spun around her, and she gripped the back of the couch to steady herself. Then slowly she turned and walked down the hall to their bedroom. It took her nearly an hour to pack. She was methodical, mechanical folding maternity clothes and toiletries into a weekender bag. She paused over the ultrasound photo taped to her mirror, her fingertips brushing the image of the tiny baby inside her. A sob escaped her lips, and she clutched the photo to her chest. When she returned to the front door, James was still standing there, arms folded. "I'll stay at the Rosewood Inn," she said, her voice tight. "Don't worry, you won't have to see me." He nodded once, but she didn't wait for him to speak again. She pulled on her coat, lifted her bag, and stepped into the cold night. The snow was thicker now. Her tires crunched against the icy driveway as she drove away from the home they had built together. She didn't know where she was headed beyond that night, or how she would explain any of this to her family. All she knew was that she had never felt so humiliated, abandoned, and alone. Back inside the house, James sank onto the couch, head in his hands. He stared at the framed ultrasound photo on the mantel, the only remnant Elizabeth hadn't taken. The silence was deafening, and the scent of her lavender candles still lingered in the air. A cruel echo of everything he had just destroyed. The next morning, Veronica arrived with a suitcase and a smile, already talking about reorganizing the kitchen and repainting the nursery. James didn't respond. He simply turned away, because deep down he knew he had crossed a line he could never uncross, and the price of that betrayal had only just begun to unfold. Would you like to continue with Chapter 7, rewritten in the same style and length? Days turned into weeks, and Elizabeth's once bright future appeared broken beyond repair. She stayed at the small inn until her credit card bills piled up. Worried about finances and medical care, she finally confided in her sister, Sarah Spencer, who flew in from Boston immediately. Furious and alarmed, Sarah convinced Elizabeth to move into a modest rental cabin she secured for them. Sarah fronted the deposit, refusing to let her pregnant sister live in misery at a motel Elizabeth's obstetrician. Dr. Marianne Keller noticed the emotional stress was affecting her health. She emphasized that Elizabeth needed stability and supportive care for the sake of her unborn child. Embarrassed but determined, Elizabeth started consulting with local attorneys. She reached out to a family friend, Mark Dawson, an attorney based in Denver who specialized in divorce and estate law. When Elizabeth tearfully explained what happened, Mark's outrage was palpable. "All the more reason to build a strong case," he asserted. "There's a lot at stake here. Your financial security, the baby's future. If James is under someone else's control, we need to uncover the truth. Don't let shame keep you from pursuing justice." Elizabeth agreed. Over multiple phone calls and meetings, Mark and Sarah helped piece together the timeline of events. Elizabeth had no hard evidence of James's affair, only a gut feeling and the shock of his abrupt change in behavior. But Mark was certain that if they dug deep enough, they might find proof. Maybe she could subpoena his phone records or bank statements. Mark also considered hiring a private investigator to track Veronica's background. Elizabeth hesitated. She still loved James and prayed he would come to his senses. But she also knew she needed to protect herself and her baby. And then a small miracle occurred. She received a call from Carolyn Harrington, James's mother. Caroline, who had heard rumors but hadn't gotten the full story, was aghast. She'd tried calling James, but he brushed her off, making vague excuses that he and Elizabeth were taking a break. Sensing foul play, Caroline reached out to Elizabeth. When she learned the shocking truth that James had kicked his pregnant wife out of their home, Caroline was livid. "It's not like my son at all," she told Elizabeth. "I know James. Something must be terribly wrong for him to act this way." Caroline flew to Aspen to see Elizabeth, bringing emotional and financial support. She felt partially responsible, believing she'd failed in raising James with enough moral backbone to resist temptation. After hearing about Mark Dawson's plan, Caroline offered to contact some of James's associates to see if they had any leads on who this Veronica woman was. She was resolved, if her son was embroiled in a scandal, she wanted to help Elizabeth, her daughter-in-law and mother, to her grandchild get justice, or at least some security. While Elizabeth and her small support team worked quietly in Aspen, James's life in the mansion with Veronica was spiraling. Veronica spent lavishly using James's credit cards without restraint. She redecorated rooms to suit her taste, removing any trace of Elizabeth. She even made casual remarks like, "We should turn the nursery into an office. I need space to work on my branding projects." James was horrified. He clung to the baby furniture and decorations, telling her they should wait before making drastic changes. Veronica rolled her eyes. She'd gotten what she wanted, or so she thought, behind the scenes. Mark Dawson hired a skilled private investigator, Andrea Phillips, to dig into Veronica's past. Andrea discovered that Veronica had been married once before to a wealthy businessman from Miami who had mysteriously lost a chunk of his fortune shortly after their divorce. Rumors suggested Veronica had walked away with a sizable settlement thanks to well-timed leverage. The patterns were too similar to ignore. Next, Andrea looked for any digital footprints connecting James and Veronica. She struck gold, suspicious hotel reservations, dinner receipts, and even a series of cryptic messages that implied blackmail. Veronica had once texted James a line about photos that could ruin everything. Though it wasn't an outright admission, it was enough to raise eyebrows in a courtroom. Elizabeth was torn when she saw the evidence. On the one hand, it confirmed her worst fears that James had indeed been having an affair for months. On the other hand, it gave her a sense of vindication. She was not crazy or unlovable. She was the victim of a well-orchestrated scheme. Caroline Harrington, meanwhile, got in touch with a couple of James's long-time business partners, including Philip Baker from Redwood City. The mutual friend who'd introduced James and Elizabeth Phillip mentioned that James had seemed on edge for months and had confided vaguely about a woman threatening him. From that conversation, Caroline and Elizabeth deduced that James might actually regret his actions, but felt blackmailed into compliance. Elizabeth wrestled with her feelings. She knew James had betrayed her, but if he was under Veronica's thumb, did he deserve a second chance, or at least some understanding? Sarah scoffed at the idea of forgiveness, while Mark reminded Elizabeth to focus on the legal battle. Elizabeth's unborn child was her priority. Eventually, Mark decided to file for divorce on Elizabeth's behalf, citing emotional and financial abandonment, along with adultery. He also prepared a separate lawsuit for spousal support and child support. Before serving the papers, Mark gave James one final chance to reconcile amicably. He had Caroline deliver a letter personally to James, detailing Elizabeth's demands: full spousal support, property division, and an agreement to co-parent once the baby was born. James felt like a man drowning in quicksand. On one side, Veronica threatened to destroy his reputation if he kicked her out. On the other, his mother and Elizabeth's lawyer demanded an equitable divorce settlement that could tarnish his finances and brand even more if he refused. Meanwhile, the guilt of abandoning his pregnant wife gnawed at him. Daily, Veronica escalated her manipulation. She discovered Caroline's letter on James's desk, read it, and flew into a rage. "You're still talking to her, trying to negotiate behind my back," she screamed. "You're pathetic. I told you to get rid of her." She ripped the letter to shreds in front of him. James shouted back, reminding her that he had a child on the way, that he was already giving her everything she asked for. But Veronica sneered. "Maybe I should just call the tabloids. Now let them know what's really going on. Then you'll see who's in control." That evening, James locked himself in his study, ignoring Veronica's dramatic pleas from the hallway. He couldn't sleep. He drank whiskey, stared at the nursery, and contemplated how his life had unraveled. For the first time, James began to suspect he might lose everything if he didn't act swiftly. Yes, Elizabeth might divorce him, but perhaps he could salvage a relationship with his unborn child if he came clean. In a moment of clarity, James called Philip Baker. Voice shaking, he confessed the affair, the blackmail, and his terror at losing his empire. Philip, though disappointed, was more worried for James's mental health and Elizabeth's well-being. "Come clean, James." Philip insisted, "Stop letting that woman ruin your life. If you show genuine remorse, we can manage the public backlash. It's the only way." Elizabeth sat on the edge of the examination table, one hand on her belly, the other gripping her phone. Her obstetrician, Dr. Keller, had just stepped out to fetch some routine lab results, but Elizabeth couldn't focus. Her phone buzzed for the 4th time in less than 5 minutes. She hesitated before picking it up again, already dreading what she would see. Another message from an unknown number. Maybe next time, pick a man who doesn't cheat. Another gold digger. The whole world knows now, and then he left you for someone better. Get over it. Elizabeth stared at the words, numbs. Her ears rang, her breath quickened, and her stomach churned not from pregnancy, but from a rising tide of humiliation and rage. She opened her email and found several gossip site links forwarded anonymously. One headline read, "Millionaire breaks free from clingy pregnant wife, finds true love." They'd published photos of her from charity events, twisted her background into a narrative of calculated social climbing, and painted James as a victim of manipulation. Her pregnancy was described as a trap. And worst of all, she knew exactly who had orchestrated this smear campaign. Veronica Elizabeth dropped the phone onto the exam table and buried her face in her hands, trying to steady her breathing. But the dam broke. She sobbed uncontrollably, sharp, painful cries that echoed through the sterile room. By the time Dr. Keller returned, Elizabeth was curled on her side, shaking, "Oh, sweetheart." Dr. Keller rushed to her. "You're under too much stress. This isn't good for you or the baby." "I know," Elizabeth whispered between sobs. I didn't ask for any of this." When she left the clinic later that afternoon, Sarah was waiting in the parking lot. One look at Elizabeth's face, and Sarah opened her arms without a word. Elizabeth collapsed into her sister's embrace. "They're saying horrible things about me," Elizabeth gasped. "The media online. I don't even know how they got this story." Sarah's jaw clenched. "That vulture must have leaked it." "Veronica. She's desperate and clearly unhinged. She's ruining my life," Elizabeth whispered. "Then it's time we ruin hers." That night at their rental cabin, Elizabeth laid the gossip articles out across the kitchen table. Sarah hovered behind her, reading with disgust. "I'm going to sue her," Elizabeth said firmly, fire flickering in her eyes. "I don't care how long it takes. She can't get away with this." "Damn right she won't." The next morning they met with Mark Dawson. He listened in silence as Elizabeth laid out what had happened. Every message, every article, every cruel whisper that had followed her since that day at the clinic. When she was finished, Mark tapped a folder on his desk. "I suspected something like this might happen. I've already started drafting the defamation lawsuit. What Veronica's done is not only malicious, it's traceable. These leaks didn't come out of nowhere. Her fingerprints are all over them." "But how do we prove it?" Elizabeth asked. "She's smart, manipulative. She's also sloppy," Mark replied. "People like Veronica think they're untouchable, that arrogance leaves a trail." He leaned forward. "We'll subpoena the tabloid publishers. If even one of them admits she was their source, We have grounds for real damages. In the meantime, I'm filing for a gag order to stop her from spreading more lies." Elizabeth nodded, slowly, absorbing every word. "And James, do you think he was part of this?" Mark paused. "I doubt it. If anything, I think she's acting without his consent now. Our PI Andrea has found signs that James is trying to pull away from her. He's cornered. My guess is he's just too weak to fight her off." Elizabeth looked away, heart aching despite herself. The next day, Andrea called with an update. "I found something," she said over the speakerphone. "Veronica's used this tactic before I tracked down 2 of her former partners. Both wealthy, both ended their relationships in shambles after she leaked false information to tabloids. She uses humiliation like a weapon," Andrea sent over. Screenshots, social media posts, anonymous blog entries, all eerily similar to Elizabeth's current nightmare. It was enough to establish a pattern of behavior. A judge would see it. And more importantly, the world would see the truth. That night, Elizabeth sat alone in the small nursery they'd been preparing in the cabin. A soft yellow mobile hung above the crib, spinning lazily. She ran her fingers along the edge of the bassinet, her thoughts swirling. She thought of the nights she and James had stayed up, talking about baby names. The way he used to rest his hand on her belly, waiting for kicks. The way he promised he'd always protect her. And then she thought of how easily he'd let Veronica in. How fast he had let go. But tonight, for the first time, Elizabeth wasn't drowning in grief. She was done waiting for apologies or rescue. She had something better. Evidence, allies, and a righteous fire that burned hotter with every cruel headline. 3 days later, James finally returned her call. His voice was low, hesitant. "Elizabeth, I didn't know she'd do this. I swear to you, I never meant for your name to be dragged like this." She said nothing. She went behind my back. I didn't approve of any media leak. Elizabeth finally spoke. "But you didn't stop her either. You let her move into my house. You let her take everything. I was scared." He admitted. "She threatened to destroy me. You destroyed me." "James," she replied coldly. "And you let her do it." A long silence followed. Then Elizabeth added, "You can try to fix this in court. That's all I have left to say." And she hung up. The next morning, Mark filed the defamation lawsuit and secured an emergency motion for a protective order. The legal wheels began to turn. Elizabeth wasn't just reacting anymore, she was in control. Sarah bought celebratory muffins, but Elizabeth didn't smile. "Not yet. I'll smile when Aurora is born." "Safe," she said. "And when I walk into court with my head held high, and this time the world would hear her side of the story." The day of the preliminary divorce hearing arrived. The Colorado courthouse was packed with curious onlookers, journalists, and even a few members of Aspen's high society. Elizabeth wore a modest dress, her pregnant belly clearly visible. James arrived alone, looking drained, while Veronica stood on the sidelines, wearing oversized sunglasses, hoping to remain invisible to the official proceedings. Mark Dawson presented the case for Elizabeth. The documented evidence of James's affair, the abrupt eviction of his pregnant wife, and Veronica's probable blackmail. He also introduced evidence of Veronica's pattern of manipulation from Andrea's investigation. It painted a vivid picture of Elizabeth as the wronged party carrying James's child, who deserved substantial financial protection and custody arrangements. When James took the stand, he faltered at first, struggling to find the right words. He admitted to the affair, explained how it began, and then tearfully expressed remorse for betraying Elizabeth. He painted himself as a fool who fell under Veronica's spell and threats. He admitted under oath that Veronica had demanded he evict Elizabeth, and that he had followed through out of fear and stupidity. It was a stunning confession. Veronica, furious at James's admission, stormed out of the courtroom, her heels clacking angrily on the polished floor. In the hallway, she launched a tirade at a waiting reporter, spouting claims that James was lying, that Elizabeth was a master manipulator, and that she, Veronica, had been misled and seduced by James's wealth. The reporter took notes, eyes gleaming at the dramatic turn of events. The judge, Honourable Rebecca Sinclair, was unimpressed by any attempts to shift blame. She ordered a thorough financial review to ensure Elizabeth received a fair portion of James's assets and monthly support for the unborn child. She also granted a temporary restraining order against Veronica, preventing her from contacting Elizabeth. During a recess, James approached Elizabeth quietly. He said he was sorry for everything. Elizabeth, tears in her eyes, nodded, but said little. She carried too much hurt to forgive quickly, yet seeing him finally stand up to Veronica gave her a sliver of respect for him. If not for their marriage, then for the sake of their unborn child. Veronica's meltdown was just getting started. She took to social media, posting cryptic messages about lives she had ruined. She sold her version of the story to a tabloid, claiming that James had promised her marriage and a lavish lifestyle. In doing so, she inadvertently exposed her own manipulative tendencies. Messages she shared to paint James as the aggressor also revealed how she pressured him to leave Elizabeth. The media, sensing a bigger scoop, dug into Veronica's past. One investigative journalist discovered that her former husband in Miami had quietly sued her for fraud, but the case settled out of court. Another tabloid found acquaintances willing to speak about her consistent pattern of targeting wealthy men, amassing hush payments, and leaving once their finances took a hit. The tide of public sentiment turned against Veronica, labeling her a serial gold digger and black widow. Under this pressure, Veronica vanished from Aspen, leaving James with unpaid credit card bills and a tarnished reputation. As the lawsuits piled up, Elizabeth's divorce and defamation claims, potential charges from other former targets, Veronica decided to flee the country. Rumors placed her in Europe, living under a different name, but nobody seemed to care enough to track her down. The damage she had inflicted was already done, and her illusions of grandeur evaporated in the harsh spotlight of public exposure. The final divorce settlement came 6 weeks later. Under Colorado law and guided by the judge's order, Elizabeth was awarded a substantial monthly allowance for herself and the baby, which would continue until the child turned 18. She also received a significant lump sum, reflecting the years she had supported James as he built his empire. The judge acknowledged that Elizabeth had sacrificed her own career prospects and deserved financial stability. James was granted the right to see his child, provided he adhered to certain conditions that the court deemed necessary for the child's welfare. Elizabeth, with guidance from Mark and Sarah, decided to move into a comfortable home near the hospital, where she planned to give birth. She wanted to focus on creating a peaceful environment for the baby's arrival. Caroline Harrington remained supportive, promising to help Elizabeth any way she could. As for James, he realized the price he'd paid for his moment of weakness. His business image had taken a hit, though his core investments remained strong. Most painfully, he'd lost the trust of the woman he once loved deeply. He found himself spending nights alone in a once happy home that now felt like a mausoleum of regrets. Without Veronica's presence, the mansion was eerily quiet, a constant reminder of the havoc he had unleashed. Yet James tried to find a path toward redemption. He underwent therapy sessions to understand his actions, donated to organizations supporting single mothers, and even set up a scholarship, in Elizabeth's name, at a local art college, hoping to reflect the passions she once nurtured. He was determined to be a present father if Elizabeth would allow it. A few months later, Elizabeth went into labor on a crisp autumn evening. Sarah rushed her to the hospital, calling James only because Elizabeth insisted. Despite everything she felt, James deserved the chance to see his child enter the world. James arrived breathless and anxious, carrying flowers. The tension between him and Sarah was palpable, but Elizabeth was in the throes of contractions, and no one had time for past grievances. After several hours of labor, Elizabeth gave birth to a healthy baby girl named Aurora Grace. Harrington. Elizabeth felt a wave of relief and gratitude wash over her. Holding her daughter for the first time, she realized that all the betrayal and heartbreak could never overshadow the joy of this precious new life. James entered the hospital room with tears streaming down his face. He gently cradled Aurora, whispering apologies and promises that he would do right by her. Elizabeth watched, tears in her eyes, uncertain about the future, but grateful that Aurora had a father present at her birth. For a moment, it was as if the world paused, allowing them a brief reprieve from all the drama that had led to this moment. Over the following weeks, Elizabeth focused on motherhood. She and James established a visitation schedule that allowed him to see Aurora regularly. Though Elizabeth remained guarded, Sarah eventually returned to Boston, confident that her sister was regaining her sense of self. Caroline made frequent visits, doting on her granddaughter and supporting Elizabeth. She never stopped chastising James for his betrayal, but she also encouraged him to step up as a father. Slowly, James built a routine around Aurora, feeding her changing diapers and reading bedtime stories. Each act felt like a step toward redemption, even if he knew he might never fully earn Elizabeth's forgiveness. Financially stable now, Elizabeth decided to revive her passion for art. She opened a small gallery in Aspen, focusing on local artists. The community rallied around her, partly out of sympathy for her ordeal, but mostly because they saw her genuine love for art. Her gallery became a humble success, and she felt pride in rebuilding her life on her terms. James, meanwhile, poured himself into philanthropic endeavors. He stepped away from the more cutthroat aspects of his business, leaving them to a trusted partner. He dedicated time and resources to supporting pregnant women in crisis, a cause that resonated deeply after witnessing what Elizabeth went through. Privately, he prayed. Elizabeth might eventually see that he had changed, though he understood the scars might never fully heal. Nearly a year after Aurora's birth, Elizabeth agreed to meet James for dinner this time, not about legal matters or custody schedules. She had seen how lovingly he cared for their daughter. She also wanted them to have a civil relationship for Aurora's sake. The dinner took place at a quiet bistro in Aspen, where they shared a private corner table. James looked nervous, wearing a simple suit and carrying a bouquet of lilies, Elizabeth's favorite. She accepted them with a small smile. The conversation was tentative at first, focusing on Aurora's milestones. Then they ventured into more personal territory. The affair, the betrayal, and how each of them had changed. Elizabeth admitted she still felt anger and hurt, but she also believed in second chances. James, his voice thick with emotion, said he regretted everything. He didn't plead for a reconciliation. He simply thanked her for allowing him to be part of Aurora's life. By the end of the evening, they parted with a warm handshake. It wasn't a grand romantic reunion, but it was a sign of progress, a glimmer of hope for co-parenting harmony. The final piece of Elizabeth's legal battles concerned the defamation suit. With Veronica gone, the process dragged, but Mark Dawson pressed forward. The judge ultimately ruled in Elizabeth's favor, awarding her damages for the slander that labeled her a gold digger. Though collecting payment from Veronica was unlikely given her disappearance, the judgment publicly cleared Elizabeth's name. The media moved on, chasing fresher scandals. Elizabeth's story lingered only as a cautionary tale in certain circles. She found solace in the knowledge that her reputation was restored, that she had stood up for herself in the face of injustice, and that her daughter would grow up knowing her mother fought back. 2 years later, Elizabeth was thriving. Her gallery had expanded, and she'd opened a second location in Denver. Aurora was a spirited toddler who adored splashing in puddles and painting with her fingers. James had remained consistent in Aurora's life. Over time, he and Elizabeth forged a respectful friendship, though romance never fully rekindled. They agreed that Aurora deserved 2 parents who genuinely cared for her without the toxicity of their past, overshadowing her future. James continued therapy, working through the guilt and learning from his catastrophic mistakes. He channeled his ambition into more ethical business ventures and philanthropic work. He even served on the board of a foundation dedicated to helping vulnerable women escape manipulative relationships. For him, it was a form of atonement. Veronica's fate remained a mystery. Some believed she'd latched onto another wealthy target in Europe. Others speculated she was living off the funds she had siphoned away. But the world had grown weary of her drama. She became little more than a ghost story among Aspen's elite circles, an example of how greed and manipulation could lead to spectacular downfall. Elizabeth often reflected on her journey. She had faced unimaginable heartbreak and public humiliation, yet she emerged stronger with new purpose. She had found her own independence, raised a beautiful child, and refused to let betrayal define her. In her quiet moments, she felt gratitude for the lessons learned, for the friends who stood by her, and for the chance to create a stable, happy home for Aurora. Though she would never forget the pain, Elizabeth Harrington had built a new life from the ashes of her broken marriage. In a way, her courtroom revenge wasn't just about winning a legal battle. It was about reclaiming her dignity and forging a future where she and her daughter could flourish. And that, in the end, was her greatest triumph. And so ends the tumultuous tale of how a cunning mistress orchestrated the ousting of a pregnant wife only for that wife to rise, fight back in the courtroom, and find her own path to victory. Elizabeth's journey reminds us that even in the darkest twists of betrayal, resilience, courage, and a fierce determination to protect what truly matters can triumph over treachery. If you were captivated by the drama twists and ultimate redemption, be sure to let us know. Did this story move you, shock you, or inspire you? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another real-life drama or gripping tale of betrayal and revenge. Your support helps us continue bringing you the most riveting stories from all corners of life. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay true to yourself and stand firm against any storm that life may bring.